All right, today we are going to learn how to transfer an image that has a grid on it to the grid that we drew. And basically, we're learning to scale this smaller size into whatever size we want it to be. We can make it as large as we want. But this particular grid is the 9" by 9" with 3" squares. So the whole thing is a square, and this is a square, and there are 9 squares that we're looking at. The first thing to remember is that each of these squares is going to be the corresponding square here. So the left square on the photo that has the grid is going into this left square here. Some people really like to label things. So if you wanted, you could label square 1, 2, and 3. And then over here, you could label 1, 2, 3. That way you don't get confused. Now this is really important whenever you have a lot of squares. So over here you would lightly label 1, 2. I'm doing it really small because this is my nice paper and I don't want to get confused. Now the same square here is still square 1, and this is 2, and this is 3. Now the only reason that we're doing this is because it's going to help us from getting confused, right? We're in the second square, so that's where we start. Third square, that's where we start. So first thing we're going to look at is paying attention to each square and where the lines are falling in the square. So the most important thing to think about is the halfway point. If we are looking in this one square only, and you're really paying attention to the outside edge of the candy corn and where it falls into each little square. And then we're looking at this line right here where the yellow changes to the orange. We're going to pay attention to where does it fall on this one square. Now, if we were to look at the halfway point, which is about right here, right? We can eyeball something, look at it and say, that is the halfway point, right? Now, if we were to take this and break it into half, it'd be about right here. So this is a quarter. So this is the halfway point, and then this is half of half, which is a quarter. That line falls right underneath it. So if we move over to our number 1 square right here on our grid, and we look at the halfway point, and then we go half of half, which is about right here, that little line is going to fall right here. And I'm going to put a starting point for that first square. Then I have to go back and say, okay, how far up do I need to make this little corner of my candy corn be? Like, how far does it need to come up to this little point here? And it is really close to that line. So you can kind of say, well, that's about like way up here, really close to the line, right? And if I look, this is the halfway point. And if I say half of the halfway point this way is right there, that's right where that candy corn is. So if I go up here and I say that's the halfway point in this one box, and then half of that is about right here. So that is a nice little curve point for where I can put the corner of that candy corn. Then I have to decide, where does it exit the box? Because this is a pretty straight, I mean, it's slightly curved line, and it exits down here. Now, if we look at the halfway point on this box, it's right about here. Now, we've got right above the halfway point, we have the entrance of another candy corn that we can put on the grid. So, if we look at it's not quite a quarter. It's just above a quarter. So if this is about halfway and this is a quarter, which is half of half, we go right above that. That's a pretty good point, right? So this is halfway, and then we're going to say half of half. Well, let me put a little mark for halfway. And then half of half is there, but it's right above the halfway point. So it's somewhere in between there. And then you can do a nice, gentle straightish line that points down right there, right? And it's slightly curved. So now we've got what is a very similar line, and we know that it's big enough because we matched it. And then what we've got left is this line right here. So if we pay attention to this point and the little corner right here, I'd say that this is about halfway on this little line, right? It's right around the halfway point. So I can go to this line and I can say, all right, is this halfway, right? What's the halfway point here? It's right about Let's double check it. Yeah, right about here, right? So there's where that line starts. And then we say it exits not at the halfway point. Look, it's going over at an angle. And if this is the halfway point on this box right here, and this is the half of half, so it's like half this distance, it's just to the right of it, then we can come over here and say this is halfway, and then half of that is about here, so it'd be just to the right of the halfway point, and we know it's a nice gentle curving line that connects it, and we want it to be nice and light so that when we come back in with our watercolor, it is a nice gentle curve. Now that is nearly everything, and we know that it is the right size. It's filling up the box just like this is. Every single box has to be done like that. So then you go to the next box, and you can see that you can either go into this one, or you can continue this line down here, and we know it's the same line that we've already drawn. It continues down to this point right here. Well, let's look at it. What's the halfway point? Because this is a nice reference for us. Halfway, we can always see halfway, right? And then we can see half of half, which is easy to see, which is about right here. It's just to the right of halfway. So this is half of half, which is quarter, and then it's just to the right. So then we can come over here, and we know that in this next box, number 2, this is the halfway point. This is half of half, and it was just to the right. So we know that this line is going to gently curve out this way. And that is how big that is. If you start drawing this triangle and you just put it in one little square, it's not going to be the right size. Your one picture needs to cover all 9 squares. So you have to be able to figure out, how can you make this be big enough, right? This one candy corn goes all the way through the middle of the middle square. So this one candy corn goes, let's see, this is the middle of the middle square, right? It's to the right of that by a little bit. So if this is the middle of the middle square, it's to the right of that by a little bit. So it's coming out at least that much. So you can put a little, a little spot saying, I think it comes out about this far. And then it goes below this line down here. Because if you look, we're in the middle square. That's our middle square right here. See? It's got to go all the way down into the very bottom level of the square. So it comes way down here somewhere, right? You can kind of put little marker points and be like, oh, that's way the heck down there. So you know that this one candy corn takes up this whole space here. So whenever you are working on this piece, just know that you have one image that you choose from. You get one layout, and you're going to blow it up and make it fill up your entire grid. If you have more than one image, you are not doing it right. This is your one image. You can choose either number 1, number 2. There's a whole bunch of different layouts that we made. So you've got to be able to get that one image blown up onto all 9 squares. Bruh. So this right here, the bottom of this line, you can kind of put there's like a shadow underneath it. Look at that, there's a shadow. So you may want to also account for how far does the shadow go. So here's the line here. It goes from, you could break it into thirds. This is about 1/3 on this is, if you break it into even thirds, that's the lower third. So we can come over here. In the second box, we can break it into, equal-ish thirds. And that's about where the bottom of that candy corn goes. So it takes up a big old section. And then it comes way over here. If you see the bottom of this little block here, it is to the right of the middle. So this is the middle. That is almost to a quarter. It didn't quite make it. So here's middle, and then there's quarter. So it's almost a quarter. It comes to about here. So we know that the bottom of this candy corn comes way the heck over here. And then we know it comes way down here. And we don't know how far down. We have to measure and figure out how far down does it come into this box, right? So you can kind of come back in and say, okay, well, if you really want to figure out how far up is that, you can say, this is half, right? And then half of half is quarter. That's about quarter. And then you can say half of that is 1/8. Well, that's the shadow right here. The bottom of this thing is right about the 1/8. So you break it in half, then you break it in half again, then you break it in half one more time. That's 1/8. So over here, we're going to break it, whoops, wrong one, this one. We're in the bottom, right? We're going to break it in half. somewhere in there. And then we're going to break it in half again. And then we're going to break it in half again. That's 1/8, and it's going to be about even right here. And so it takes up that one little corner. And then there's also a cast shadow next to it that you'll have to think about. So this thing is just, look how much bigger it is than the original. All right, so that is the basics of the entire thing. I'm not going to make you sit here and watch every single step here, but just know that you are scaling this pretty large. It's going to be a really large candy corn, or 3 candy corns, because this is a good design that we're doing here, and we're making sure that you're learning this really cool technique that you can use over and over again, but also you're zooming these in really large, because for us, when we draw candy corn, they're itty bitty tiny, so it's difficult for us to think of them in large terms. This is going to be easier for us to paint, and it's going to be a lot more fun and relaxing piece for us. Here is the finished sketch of the 3 candy corns from the image that I chose. Out of the 6 layouts, I chose this one, and then I transferred it onto this larger piece. See, they're all very large, taking up the entire grid that I drew with one image, and very lightly sketched. And if you'll pay attention, these little parts here are kind of blurry lines, right? So you can make that really light, because we want to try and blend that later on. I think that you'll have a lot of fun blending those little color edges together. So good luck.